Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is a Ukraine War late night frontline update for it's still the 8th of June for me, 2024. It might not be for people to the right of me. It certainly will be for some time for the people to the left of me. Of course, if you go further to the right, you get to the left anyway, because that's the horseshoe theory of the globe and geography. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please pause the video and check out the key on the screen now. So let's go to that front line, and we can see that no change to the southern front line, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, that neck of the woods. No change to the Dnipro front line. Some small changes to Chaziv Yar and up in the northeastern area near Kupiansk, and some to the northern sectors around Kharkiv. Now, it's worth noting that Suriyat Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, hasn't mapped for 4 days. So I've had no update from them for some time. Now, they do mapping for other areas. They appear to be mainly aligned with, and most of their maps are things to do with Russia. So I don't know what's going on. Sometimes they take a bit of time off. They usually announce it. But yeah, no tweets or anything from Suriyat Maps, and no mapping update. I was going to turn their map off, but thought, no, keep it on anyway for the time being at least. And if we don't hear anything from them going forward, then their lines will be too out of date. Right, if we look at these two sectors to the north of Kharkiv, north and northeast, we have the one around Lyobakay to Lukiantsy, the one coming down to Lipsy there, and then we have the one around Vovchansk here. So we're going to have a little look at both of these. There are quite a few sources at the moment. Well, first of all, we go over to the one further to the west, where you can see that Andrew Perpetua has some change to the mapping, where the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back at Lyobakay there. And last night, no report said Ukrainian attacks to drive Russian forces out of Lyobakay have started. Without going into detail about when and from which direction, the first signs look good. Drone units are actively working on Russian remnants inside the settlement, jointly working with assault units. This is good news coming from no reports, with a sense of, the tail in the air, ears perked up. Things are looking good for Ukraine there. We have David D, and again, sometimes quite overly positive for Ukraine, but here says Lyobakay has been recaptured and that has been geolocated. So we might have a more significant change to the mapping. This might be a little bit out of date. It could be that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians more concretely out of or further back in Lyobakay. But that's important, because remember, there were three possible objectives here. One was to get close enough down through Lipsy that they could bombard Kharkiv with artillery. So get within artillery ranges. Objective one. We have a contiguous buffer zone for Belgorod on the northern border, and that's 2. And 3 would be drawing Ukrainian troops away from other frontline areas to make these frontline areas weaker, so that you could attack in some of these places. Now, they seem to have failed in that number 1. They're getting pushed back in the Lipsy area. Well, they never really got to Lipsy. They're being pushed back further to the north. So that's a failure. They haven't made a contiguous, serious buffer zone to Belgorod, so that's a failure. And they are drawing their own troops from these areas of the front line elsewhere, where you would hope, if you were Russian, that they'd be getting a force ratio advantage here. But actually drawing their own troops away means that they're being disadvantaged, arguably, and that depends where they're drawing from, where the Ukrainians are drawing them from. But the end result appears to be that all 3 objectives that I've listed, the Russians appear to have failed at all 3 of them. So it could be that they've been pushed back significantly in that Lipsy direction. Then we have Getty talking about the armed forces of Ukraine counterattacking in Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region, advance in the area of Torgova, Shevchenko, Gagarina, Zhovnev streets. So the Russians appear to be getting pushed back not just around here, but also in Vovchansk. Indeed, there are significant claims coming out tonight or today from Vovchansk. There are claims that the Ukrainians have been completely pushed out of Vovchansk. I mean, we were talking just there about these streets in that kind of very central area, just north of the Vovchansk River there. But there are other much larger claims, such as Russians cannot even take Vovchansk. Actually, that's something I want to come to in a while. But we're going to refer to that source from Tendar, the claim. Anyway, here we have another source saying Ukraine has kicked the Russian army out of Vovchansk. Whether that means completely or whether that's just further pushing back, because that shows them still in Vovchansk. But we do have no reports saying most of Vovchansk in the Kharkiv region is under the control of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, with efforts to fully liberate the city underway, according to Nazar Voloshin, spokesman for the Kortitsia operational group of troops. So the person in charge of the troops around that area is saying that they are essentially attempting to liberate it now, pushing the Russians further and further out of Vovchansk. How successful they have been or how far they pushed the Russians back, I guess we'll find out as time goes on. But it could be that the Russians are much further back from their present lines shown here. And indeed, if you look at Andrew Perpetua, that would have been more realistic anyway, because this would have been 4 days out of date for the red line. So, but Deep State map, the yellow line still having the Russians quite far down south there. Andrew Perpetua less so, grey zone to the south of all of these points, but yeah, how far the Russians have been pushed, I don't know. So we'll go to this Tendar claim at the moment, or synopsis, sorry, at the moment. So showing that pushback in Vovchansk, and there we have the Lyobake area as well, and then we go to the northern Kupiansk sort of. Oh no, that's Bakhmut area. But we'll come to that later. Anyway, let's see what Tendar has to say. So the Russian incursion in northern Kharkiv is now 1 month ongoing, and it is time to summarize the immediate results. When the Russian offensive started, the Russian advance was initially, at least when compared to the creeping in the east, relatively fast. Vovchansk was obviously their primary target in that sector. Russians were superior in numbers, shells, and had absolute freedom to strike Ukrainians from Russian territory, since Western weapons were restricted from being used there. But the Russian incursion was eventually bogged down. On May the 18th, Ukrainian missiles hammered several Russian positions in the northern quarters of Vovchansk. This was also the day when the last Russian advance was recorded in the sector. So that is May the 18th. We are June the 8th now. The development at the western Kharkiv advance was quite similar. From a tactical point of view, Russians didn't take any or make any noteworthy gains. Vovchansk continues to be primarily under Ukrainian control, and in fact, Ukrainians have already regained some previously lost parts. The Russian dreamed to come any closer to Kharkiv city itself in order to position tubed artillery in range of Ukraine's second largest city is but only a fever dream. So even this tactical objective of the Russian army is nowhere near to materializing. Much more importantly, however, is the strategic situation. Much more important is the strategic situation. Again, Russians couldn't break the Ukrainian lines and are now even compelled to defend this area. Far worse are the political implications of that adventure. The biggest Russian miscalculation has been that the West authorized the usage of Western weapons against Russian targets in Russia, and not only exposing countless Russian targets, but also Russian bluffs when it comes to red lines. I've mentioned this several times before. It showed the Russian emperor's new clothes in such an obvious fashion. There was also the assumption that the Kharkiv incursion was a diversion for operations in the east, and indeed Russians tried multiple times to advance near Chasiv Yar, but the results there were even smaller than before the Kharkiv incursion, although I think there have been some advances in the Canal micro district over the last 24 hours or so, although that is not really the big news that the Russians would want from Chasiv Yar. The attempted Russian crossing of the Seversky Donetsk Canal failed multiple times, and the Russian armoured spearheads along their manpower along with their manpower, was swiftly eliminated. Russians haven't spent all their cannon fodder there yet, but if Kharkiv was a diversion, then this intention failed as well. All in all, the last 4 weeks, but even more, the last 8 months have shown us that even under best fighting conditions, Russians perform abysmally low. They have, or badly, they have the numbers, the shells, the airplanes. Their industry completely set for war, and most of all, the Ukrainian shell drought. Yet, despite this huge advantage, the results regarding territorial gains are extremely meagre at best. When nothing changes, and when comparing those meagre results with the huge resources Russians have allocated and eventually squandered, then we can easily call this a strategic Russian defeat. Seriously, Russians cannot even take Vovchansk, a city merely 3 miles behind their own border. Just keep this in mind and try not to laugh. This is what Jürgen Naudit said. Russians can't even take Vovchansk, a city merely 3 miles behind their own border. Honestly, that is huge. We'll come to that again in a second. Ukrainians severely degraded Russian manpower and resources. They performed exceptionally well, despite the harsh conditions, and in the process exposed Russia's weakness over and over again. It is the latest episode for the fact that Russia can be defeated. Now, the point here is, I think, really important. So the Russians did make some really quick advances because there were no fortifications, and nor were none expected in this particularly close area to the Ukrainian-Russian border there. It's too dangerous to build those. Then everyone was panicking because the Russians made such quick advances. But actually, the Ukrainians reacted very strongly in both of these sectors. And although there have been these cock-ups with the construction of fortifications in this region, with dragon's teeth being piled up on the side of roads without having been set, and so on and so forth. Actually, they didn't even need to get to the stage of the serious Ukrainian fortifications, if indeed there are those in this area, because the Ukrainians stopped the Russian advance, and the Russians have been piling in reinforcements. Significant points to note are that the Russians have primarily not been using mechanized equipment in the area, which makes you wonder really what were their objectives, because if they were hoping to make a significant buffer zone, then you need to be utilizing mechanized equipment to get your troops around to do that. Otherwise, it just becomes a slow-moving, meat-grinding assault that can only go at the pace of your soldiers walking. And then we hear about them resupplying their troops using golf carts and motorbikes. This is not looking good, and it shows that either the Russians are stockpiling the necessary equipment for doing such attacks as this for another larger offensive elsewhere, and stockpiling troops for the same, or they just don't have the kit. And they don't really have the troops, because then after this disastrous attempt to achieve 1, 2, and 3, the Russians pulled on their own reserves from training grounds and from other areas of the front line. And so this is nothing other than an operational disaster. I think this is really worth focusing on, that a city merely 3 miles into the enemy's border, and when I say city, really I mean town, cannot be taken by the Russians. The Russians failed to take Vovchansk, just over the border, with 50,000 troops. 50,000 troops. And they've failed to take it. And they've been absolutely hammered by drones, particularly. And the Ukrainians have also been bringing into this sector a lot of artillery, a lot of guided multiple launch rockets, attacks and systems, as well as guided glide bombs. So they have brought a lot down on the Russians here. But as you would expect, this is a major incursion into Ukrainian territory, and of course they're going to be reacting accordingly. The Ukrainians did lose, specifically in the opening couple of weeks of this attack, did lose quite a high number of bits of kit, particularly in the medium range by Lancets. Lancets did quite a lot of damage and probably still are doing a fair bit of damage around here. But the Ukrainians have properly stabilized. They brought in reinforcements. They've got some crack troops in on the action. Kraken was there. Is it a 47th active around there as well? So they've got some decent troops. They've got equipment, and apparently they were prioritizing artillery ammunition there. They've done a good job. The Russians have massively failed, and that could then really dent their chances of making significant gains elsewhere. Like I said at the time when the Russians attacked, I'm pretty sure it'd be better to use those 50,000 troops down in Chasiv Yar. I'm no military expert. I mean, what the hell do I know? But honestly, it seemed to me blatantly obvious that 50,000 troops up here would possibly suck away those troops from the Ukrainian troops from certain areas on a front line. But you would obtain that ratio advantage if you just put those 50,000 troops on existing front lines. You're stretching the front lines, and yes, that stretches it for the Ukrainians, but it stretches it more for the Russians, because as we talked about this morning, you've got a dogleg here. So this area of the border, if you look at that area down there, right, this is a long front line for the Russians, and if they want to take troops, which apparently they are, from this front line in the northeast and support the troops attacking Volchansk, they kind of have to do that depending on where the railways are, and the Ukrainians, on the other hand, just have to go there, right? So, like, nothing about this makes sense really for me. It's just, I think, an ill-conceived plan prosecuted by General Lapan, who's got form for being not very good, using poorly trained and equipped troops without much mechanized equipment. And then as soon as the HIMARS came along, well, it was sort of game over. I don't know, let me know what you think. I mean, there's nothing. Each day seems to confirm what I said for the entire length of this attack, and this has been going on a month now. Literally, like, we're one day away from it being going on for a month. And remember all the doom and gloom headlines in the mainstream media newspapers? What are they printing now? Nothing. They're not saying anything about this. They're not saying how brilliantly Ukraine have done and how terribly Russia have done. Guaranteed they moved on to talking about something else. It's like doom and gloom, doom and gloom, doom and gloom. Actually, it should be, this is embarrassing. Russia have made an absolute pig's ear of this, and Putin needs to know that this is embarrassing. Right, moving on before I spend too long talking about that area. Just, it blows my mind. Anyway, who knows? The Russians could do something to change things up there, but it's not looking good for them. On this northeastern axis from Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna, we have some gains for the Russians in the area around Yahidne, Ulyansky there, and Ivanivka. So the Russians seem to have taken control of Ivanivka, as according to both Syriac, Deep State Maps, thank you, and Andrew Perpetua. So both of those really pushing their lines quite away here, taking the rest of Ivanivka. I say quite away. It's not really that far, is it? I guess for Deep State Map, it's maybe, there you go, a kilometre. So they have, but anyway, that's one of the main areas on the whole front line where the Russians have made some gains over the last 24 hours, at least according to these sources. Other things could be happening. Now, the most worrying area for the Ukrainians is in the Canal micro-district, where the Russians have been coming in from the north and also coming in from the more southerly direction to take more and more, to take these little chunks of the Canal micro-district. So they took an extra road or so around that southern area. It looks like moving into the high-rise buildings there. And then in this northerly region, just coming through what looks like dachas to the north there, moving into the district proper, Yeah, so that is concerning. But when you talk about, the Kharkiv direction being a diversion for Chasiv Yar, if you think in the last month, what have they achieved around Chasiv Yar? And yeah, they're bits and pieces, but they haven't got over in any serious way the Seversky Donetsk Canal here that comes down like that. Now, they did get over it in this area and tried to attack up there, and then they got, by all accounts, annihilated inside the forest here by the Ukrainians, who were able to cut them off. They can't really get mechanized equipment. Even across the culvert here, you've got pipelines to deal with, and then you've got, this has no roads, this forested area, which is a nature reserve, and then over the culvert and into the Ukrainian controlled area, there are no roads here, and so mechanized equipment's difficult. So you're having to use mainly infantry, dismounted infantry, who are walking through these forests. There aren't any major dugouts or trenches, I don't think. And so it's not like you can take a particular area and hold it. It's just like wooded area where you then get, by all accounts, according to reporting from Ukraine, you then get cut off and killed and take losses and have to start again. So when we look at Chasiv Yar, an area where we are thinking, right, by the end of summer, and many people saying earlier than that, Chasiv Yar was going to fall. You're thinking, yeah, I mean, they might well take up to the canal by then and start trying to make their way through the outskirts of Chasiv Yar. But this is a really well defended town, and actually, the Ukrainians could be okay. And it all comes down to the depth of reserves that the Russians have and how much equipment they can draw on. But I'm, not 100% sure that the Russians are capable of an awful lot going forward unless they make some serious changes in terms of sort of mobilization. Now, they are supposedly, according to their kind of claims, recruiting around 30,000 a month. But they are losing over 1,000 a day presently, which equates to more than 30,000 a month, which means that they are, if the general staff figures are to be believed and the Russian figures are to be believed, then the Russians are making a net loss each month-on-month net loss, which then raises a question: how are they going to be capable of raising a large enough, trained enough and equipped enough force to do a major breakthrough offensive in the summer? Where's the equipment going to come from? Where the troops are going to come from? And it just looks like they're going to continue doing these grinding attacks. Meanwhile, if the Ukrainians are able to mobilize more than they are losing in attrition, then they can build up forces. We hear the French saying they're going to train 4,500 troops in one sort of French brigade, if you like. The Czechs have now announced today that they can train, is it 4,000 or something? So mobilization there, the Ukrainians are mobilizing more. They're mobilizing convicts, for example, and they seem to be getting quite a few of those. And so things are looking, I can't imagine it's going to be rosy, but things are looking better for the Ukrainians. And now we're hearing, good news about F-16s. Then you've got Mirage not too far off in the future at some point this year. If they are brought to bear and the Ukrainians keep doing what they are doing in their strikes, like last night, striking at air bases with long-distance drones, striking at Crimea. There are reports tonight, as we speak, of naval drones in Crimea again. Then I get the sense that the screw is turning. They're losing S-400, S-300 systems around here. They're losing radar systems. Crimea is, to some significant, I think, extent, more blinded than it was in terms of the number of radar installations and S-300, S-400 air defense systems that have been taken out. It's just, each week is looking more precarious for the Russians, while they're also getting their oil depots hit fairly significantly. Now, what the Russians are succeeding in doing is taking out the Ukrainian energy infrastructure. That is the single biggest vulnerability for the Ukrainians at the moment. And they're going to be fighting tooth and nail to make sure that their energy infrastructure remains safe. They are receiving more Patriots. I don't know how quickly those Patriots can get there. There's another SAMP-T to come, which is a Patriot equivalent from Italy and France. Italy providing that. There are France has promised another bit of air defense kit, a radar command thing that they've taken before, previous one of those before. I'll give you details tomorrow. So there are these bits and pieces that have been promised, and if they can get fairly quickly to the front line, to Ukraine, then that will give them, I'm sure they'll prioritize the remaining operational energy facilities. And as long as they can get back on their, or even if it's not on their feet, on their knees at least, in terms of energy production, to keep their economy afloat, to keep their defense military industrial complex functioning, then I think the prognosis for Ukraine is looking better. I'd rather be Ukraine than Russia at the moment in terms of the next 6 months. Anyway, that's enough from me. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for listening. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.